So the Nintendo 3DS got a price cut, and the big question is, why did they do it? Was it because they figured they have the handheld market on lock and don't have to worry about the competition? Or is it because they made the wrong assumption about their new piece of hardware and it isn't going the way they thought it would? That is the question, isn't it? Well, for me, this has more to do with a big mistake Nintendo made with the release of their new handheld. And I honestly don't know why they did what they did, especially with the knowledge they have on how the handheld market works. I'm really kind of surprised because from my perspective, it looks like Nintendo made the same mistake that Sony made at the launch of the PS3. They didn't release those must-have games when the 3DS launched, and that's not like Nintendo at all. Normally when they made a new handheld or console, they always have the big titles ready, so when people get the new console or handheld, they already know what they want for it. Now it almost seems like Nintendo is pushing the 3D aspect of the handheld more than anything else, which kind of makes sense with it being, the 3DS and all. And it wouldn't be too much of a problem, but what are they using to push it? Remakes. Now guys, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with remakes. However, I don't think it was wise for them to start out depending on remakes. Remakes aren't something you start off with, you bring them in later after you're comfortable where you stand in the market. Imagine if on release date, instead of Microsoft giving the Xbox 360 users Halo 3, they gave them a remake of Halo 1. Or Sony giving their fan base a remake of the first Metal Gear Solid instead of Metal Gear Solid 4. Sure, it's okay for them to release the remakes now, but doing that on launch would have been damn near suicide. Hell, for that matter, imagine if the Wii's released instead of getting Mario Galaxy, Nintendo gave us a remake of Mario 64. People would wonder what drug Nintendo was on when they thought of that. So what I'm pretty much trying to say is, I don't think it was smart to rely on remakes to sell a new console, or in this case, handheld. Now if Nintendo were the only ones in the handheld market, then I would have said it didn't really matter. But as we all know, Sony's going to try their hand at it once again. And we all, as well as Nintendo, have to assume that Sony learned from their past mistakes. Sony seems to be going all out with the PS Vita, which is going to make this a big hit or a big miss. If it turns out to be a big hit, then I think Nintendo might be in big trouble. I know Nintendo has held the title of the king of handhelds, but they have to be very careful this time around or they could risk losing that title. And we know for a fact that they don't want that to happen, because if the Wii U doesn't turn out the way they want it to either, then they're really going to be in trouble. So I think Nintendo took a huge risk releasing the 3DS the way they did. This isn't like in the past with the Nintendo Game Boy versus the Sega Game Gear versus the Atari Lynx, because back then it seemed like Sega and Atari really didn't know what they were doing in the handheld market. But the competition Nintendo has this time around has been taking notes and really studying the situation. I also agree with what Icy Rhythm said about people being satisfied with the games they can get on their cell phones. Sony is not Nintendo's only competition. While Nintendo has had a huge chunk of the handheld market, this gen cell phones now have the other half of that chunk. I could be wrong with my next statement, but I think the Nintendo 3DS sold more based on the fact that it was a 3D handheld than it did due to its gaming library. And because of that, I also think Nintendo better hurry up and get that library out before the Vita is released. They have to assume that Sony learned from their past mistakes with the PSP and won't repeat them. So instead of saying let's wait till the Vita is released and see what it has to offer, they said let's kick the Vita's ass before it even gets a chance to show what it has to offer. But I don't think they'll be able to do that by simply releasing the 3DS and relying on 3D remakes. I think right now Nintendo is backed into a corner, and I think their recent actions with the price drop is their way of getting out of that corner. It looks like they're trying to beat the competition before the competition even gets a chance, which might explain why they released the 3DS so early before their main games were even mentioned. This is all just my assumption, of course, but if I'm right in my assumption, then I think whatever tricks Nintendo may have up their sleeves, they might want to show it soon. Because the last thing I think they need right now is to lose that top spot in the handheld market. Remember guys, while a lot of people including myself are excited for the release of the Wii U, that isn't to say that it's guaranteed to succeed the way Nintendo wants it to, which means they will need a backup plan. But if Nintendo can't even rely on their backup plan, that could end up ruining them in the end, and that's the last thing I want to see happen.